Welcome to Humanist Views, where we discuss current issues from a humanist perspective. My name is Nathan Curland, and welcome. Tonight, we have with us August Berkshire, who is a past president of Minnesota Atheists. He was a recipient of the 2009 Outstanding Humanist Award from the Humanists of Minnesota, and he is also a past member of our board of directors. Welcome, August.
Well, thank you, Nathan.
So tonight, we would like to talk about a topic that is of interest to many atheists and humanists, but which neither Minnesota Atheists or Humanists of Minnesota have taken an official position on, namely, is free will an illusion? So August, I know, has brought this thing up in the past in a newsletter, in the Atheist newsletter, and I've responded to it in the Humanists of Minnesota newsletter, and we've had a little bit of a discussion on this, and so it seemed like me be an appropriate topic for this kind of show. So, August, so let's start. Does free will exist?
No, I think free will is an illusion. And I suppose we should start by defining what free will is. And I would just say simply a conscious choice.
Okay.
And so if our unconscious is doing something, that's not usually, is making some sort of decision, that's not usually what we call free will. Free will has to be a conscious choice or decision that we're somehow making. And I also think we both will agree that just because we can't flap our arms and fly doesn't mean that we might not have free will. I mean, free will doesn't mean free will to do anything that's, not physically possible. So certainly there are a lot of options in life.
So let me just stop a second, because I want to go back to the definition. You were very specific as far as saying it's a conscious choice, which implies that in order to have free will, it has to be done by what people would call the conscious part of your mind as opposed to the unconscious mind. And I do have a problem with that because, as we'll discuss a little further, really whether we choose or not is a function of the human brain, and to separate brain's functions into conscious and unconscious is a little bit arbitrary. I call it what I would call a philosophical separation. In point of fact, the brain is the brain. It's got synapses. Different parts of the brain communicate with other parts of the brain, but it's all one entity. So I think we start to get into a little bit of trouble, and that might be why we're having a discussion on free will, because what do we really mean by free will?
Well, there are people who say we have no conscious free will, but our unconscious is making free will choices, and then that counts as free will.
Right.
I don't believe in unconscious free will either. Okay. So I don't believe in any.
All right. So you can broaden your definition. It doesn't have to be conscious.
For me, it wouldn't. Most people, when we talk of it, we think of it being a conscious choice that we make. But I'll extend it into the unconscious.
And the reason I say that is because you can certainly imagine. I mean, it's happened to all of us. You're thinking about something. You have a problem. You can't. No matter how hard you try, you can't come up with an answer. And you either let it go or you sleep on it. The next morning, boom, all of a sudden you have the answer in your brain. Where did this come from? It obviously was not a conscious choice. It would seem that your brain, your unconscious part, was working while you were asleep or while you were off doing something else and came up with this answer. So it doesn't have to be, that's the reason I don't think it has to be a conscious choice.
Yeah, and I can go with that, certainly for the purposes of discussion. The unconscious is still you, it's still your brain. Right. So I don't have a problem with that.
All right.
One of the early objections to the idea that there is no free will comes from a philosopher named Laplace. And he created what's called Laplace's being, which other people called a demon, but he just referred to it as a being. Suppose there's a being who knew the position of every atom and knew the forces acting upon those atoms, gravity or whatever. Such a being would be able to predict the future.
Okay.
And this is similar to a God who would know the future. God would know these things. And in fact, there's a doctrine of predestination. It goes with Calvinism and some other things. And in fact, a lot of religious people realize that their Christianity depends on free will choices. If you're going to go to heaven or hell, you have to be free to make choices. And if God knows everything, and if God knows the future, then there's no free will.
Sure.
So how they get around this is they create something called open theology, that God is still all-knowing and all-powerful. He voluntarily gives up knowledge of the future, which an all-powerful being could do, and he could take it back if he wanted to, but he gives it back away for the greater good of giving us free will somehow.
Sure.
So even the theists realize that knowledge of all atoms and all forces can be a problem.
Right, and of course this was before most people thought much about what was happening at the subatomic level of whatever, and it's basically referring to theological determinism.
Right.
And I think we could certainly put that off the table. What we want to talk about is atheistic determinism.
Yeah.
Right.
So now you're getting into the next thing I was going to bring up is this quantum indeterminacy, which you brought up in your article, that we now know with modern physics that things happen at random and there's chaos. And for instance, you can have a pile of uranium that has a half-life of so many years, and we know that after that many years, half the uranium will have decayed into lead. But we don't specifically know which atoms are going to be the ones to decay.
Or when they will decay.
Or when they decay. Right. So there's all kinds of things at the quantum level.
Right.
That makes it not strictly a deterministic universe.
Right.
And some people see this as an opening for free will to exist. I think
including me.
You include I don't see it.
Right.
Because I don't see how we can act upon this quantum indeterminacy, that we have no control over it. Nothing has any control over it, as far as we know. So if we can't control it, how can that be an avenue toward free will?
Right. And I would argue, and I did argue in my, in what I wrote, is, well, let's just back up a little bit.
Okay.
Certainly the whole discussion of free will has always, in one way or another, been tied up with determinacy. And as you pointed out, there are actually a couple of schools of thought. There's the school of thought that says, all right, well, there is such a thing as determinacy, and free will is tied up with it, and that's sort of the part we're debating. But we can talk a little later. We can talk about the fact that there is a school that says, well, determinacy and free will are actually not incompatible, and they're compatible with each other. And there's a whole group of philosophers that talk about that, which is an interesting topic unto itself. But as far as determinacy goes, so the real question boils down to, when you get into the probabilistic, what is the mechanism? Is there, it's one thing to say that the universe is indeterminate because of what quantum physics has taught us, but as you're pointing out, the other thing is to say, okay, well, so what is the mechanism by which this indeterminacy can turn into free will? And the point I was trying to make was that really, I don't know. I don't think science has the mechanism in place either. It just separates the whole concept of determinacy from free will. And so now you have to make now you have to make an argument, if you can, which is convincing or based on scientific fact, as to why free will cannot exist in an indeterminate universe. Or oppositely, you're asking me to make an argument of why free will does exist in a indeterminate universe, I think is what the point is, right?
Yeah, I mean, if this indeterminacy or randomness is going on in our heads at an atomic or subatomic level, if we have no control over it, then how can we say we have free will, I guess is...
Exactly. So the point is, we don't know, see the whole issue of subatomic indeterminacy or probability is one of these, it's a little bit of these touchy-feely areas. Quantum physics postulates that this has to be the case, otherwise they can't explain a lot of physical phenomena. On the other hand, it has yet to give a clear answer of how this indeterminacy occurs, and how, collapse of, one of the standard things is the whole issue of like Schrodinger's cat, where you put a cat in a box with some poison, and the cat could be alive or not, and basically until you open up the box, you don't know which way it is, and therefore the way quantum mechanics works is the cat's both alive and dead until you open up the box. But there's no explanation of how opening the box makes the cat alive or dead. That part is missing, and that's one of the big unknowns in quantum physics as to how do you make that explanation. And so basically, I don't think physics has an answer yet. I would argue, and I have argued, that, well, okay, we got, and I'm not the first one to argue it. After I made the argument, I read up and I found out guys like Steven Pinker have made a similar argument, which is, well, brains got hundreds of billions of neurons, hundreds of trillions of connections, and the way our thought processes work is pretty much on the very atomic level, where these molecules are changing, chemicals are moving from one synapse to another, and during this process, you don't know where the electrons in those molecules aren't known, so there's a degree of uncertainty, and it's not inconceivable that somehow your very thought processes could influence, in a quantum sense, where the electron is going to go when it moves from one synapse to the other. But now you put all the zillions of these things together, you can make a decision.
But if you can influence, then it's no longer indeterminate by definition. If it was going to do some random atomic thing, but somehow some part of your brain can step in and affect it,
right,
then the indeterminacy is lost. And your brain can determine which way that atom is going to switch.
Well, it can push it one way or the other. It's not clear.
So that's not indeterminate anymore.
Well, all right. Interesting point. On the other hand, I got a feeling a lot of this is just verbiage.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, let's move on.
Go ahead.
One of the big issues in this argument is what's called monism versus dualism.
Okay.
And the idea used to be dualistic, that you had a body and a soul.
Right.
You had something that was physical and something that was not material, not part of the material world. Now, I think you and I reject that kind of dualism.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
That we would agree that thoughts are physical things. Mm-hmm. The brain is physical, thinking is physical. Mm-hmm. Now, it's interesting. There's sometimes we come across an idea, and it seems so obvious once we hear it. Like, why people say that about Darwin and evolution. Right. Like, once you hear what evolution is, it sounds so simple. And even one of his famous colleagues said, "Why didn't I think of that?" I didn't think of this until after I heard it. Then I thought, why didn't I think of that? If thoughts are physical things and our consciousness traces back into unconsciousness by a physical chain, we should be able to monitor unconscious thought in the brain to see what's going on in the brain. Even when we're thinking unconsciously, we should be able to find something in the brain. And in fact, now we have.
Right.
A famous experiment by Benjamin Lippitt using an EEG. Activity in the brain's motor cortex can be detected 300 milliseconds before a person feels they have made a conscious decision to move, that there's something going on in the unconsciousness that we can detect. And in another lab, using functional magnetic resonance imaging, 2 brain regions contained information about which buttons subjects would press 7 to 10 seconds before the decision was consciously made. And then in another experiment, the activity of 256 neurons was sufficient to predict with 80% accuracy a person's decision to move 700 milliseconds before he became aware of it. So we're finding brain activity in the unconscious before, and the decision is being made in the unconscious before the person is consciously aware of it. And the person thinks they're consciously making the decision, but the decision's already been made in the unconscious.
You're right, it has been made in the unconscious, and there's a delay time, as you pointed out, because our brain can't one part of our brain cannot instantaneously communicate with another part of our brain. It takes a finite amount of time, and it may have to go through many different neurons. But that does not mean that our conscious brain didn't start the process, and it's the unconscious part that is putting the pieces together for the consciousness. That does not say that we did not make a we did not put together a conscious effort to solve this problem or to make a choice, and then eventually it's coming back to us and say, aha, yes, that's the right choice that I should make.
Yeah, sometimes which would explain why we have consciousness to begin with, is to observe and bring
So
data,
to be the referee,
to bring
be the referee for all
bring
this.
data into the brain, and then the brain.
And help organize it. You know, so that's really the brain really is. And we've gotten to be pretty complex with our brains as we've gotten, you know, as we've
and when we think about our brains, the way I look at it is what we think and feel is determined by our biology before we're born, and our experiences, how our experiences affect and change that biology after we're born.
Okay.
And these are guided by evolution. That evolution, I don't think I've seen an action or a thought, especially an action, that I can't explain in evolutionary terms.
I guess I would not argue with the fact that, you know, we do have genetic background that goes back to evolutionary times, that our culture has evolved along evolutionary lines. But again, I don't think from a individual decision point of view, it'll affect in general where we're going to make our decision, but it's not, doesn't necessarily affect the outcome of an individual decision that we make from, you know, day to day or as we accumulate knowledge. So I think it's all compatible with either free will or no free will.
I think a lot of people wonder how free will could be an illusion. Why evolution would allow an illusion?
Yeah, let's move on to that, because that's something we can talk about. If people come to believe that free will is an illusion, you know, how do we really expect them to react, to act if that's true?
Well,
I mean, that's a real concern, right? I mean,
yeah.
I mean, just my original reaction when I hear something like that is, gee, well, why should I bother? I mean, you know, if I'm going to do what I'm going to do anyway, what motivation do I have to have any goals at all?
Yeah. Well, when I used to believe in gods, I thought that gods must be true because so many people believe it's true. Why would evolution allow us to have an untruth?
Right.
And the same might be said of free will. Why would we all have this illusion of free will if we didn't actually have it? But then I realized that evolution doesn't care about what's, quote, true, it cares about what's useful. And so the illusion of God can be useful, and the illusion of free will can be useful. But we don't actually, there doesn't have to be gods and there doesn't have to be free will. So how do we react? There have been a number of things in our past that we thought were true and then we came to believe weren't true, and they created a lot of disillusionment and disappointment. The realization that the Earth was not the center of the universe. We kind of got dethroned from our mountaintop.
Sure.
And we're now in some obscure little planet, an obscure sun. So that was very disillusioning, but we got over it. And then the realization that evolution is true was very disillusioning. We were no longer some high and mighty species. We're just a product of, you know, random mutation and natural selection. And this is a big one. Realizing that there's probably no gods is very disillusioning for a lot of people. In fact, some people have told us, "Oh, if I thought there was no God, why would I go on? We lose our specialness. What's the point of life? We might as well kill ourselves." But you know what? You figure out a way to go on. Because life still has value even without a God. So now I get to the fourth thing, what if free will is an illusion? Again, that's a big disappointment if there really is no free will. But you know what? We can go on. What is being bruised is our egos. Right? We're brought up that we have this we're in control kind of thing, and it's masters of our destiny and all that stuff. And so to think that there's no free will is depressing, and it's hard on our egos, just as evolution was hard on our egos. That we're not a special creation of God was hard on our egos. But we can get over it, because the way I feel, and I've tried to take my ego out, this is how I'm able to better even contemplate that free will is an illusion, is that, you know, I'm having a good life. Now, whether it's because of some brilliant decisions I'm making or some program that's running inside of me based on evolution, I'm still having the same good life. Because evolution tends to make pretty good choices, and it seems to be making good choices in my life. Most of us can learn from our mistakes, for example.
Yeah, but if you learn, I mean, just by using the word learning, you're implying that there is that you're making a choice.
No, not necessarily. No, I mean, those species that didn't learn are no longer here.
Right. But you're making a choice to absorb some information as opposed to letting it go.
No, I think you have no choice but to learn from your mistakes. We're just programmed. I mean, you touch a hot stove, you've gathered some data from your environment. It's changed the wiring of your brain based on a survival program that's already in your brain due to evolution, and you don't do it again. So I think I realize that, I'm still having a good life, whether it's, quote, me or my decisions or a program running in me. So why not just enjoy it?
But you're basically saying that here I am considering the consequences of what's going to happen. I make choices every day, and I always consider consequences, and you're telling me that forget the choice I made, it doesn't matter, I would have made it anyway. It's because everything just happened to come together at that point, and the only choice I could have made is to put on green socks instead of brown socks.
Your programming made the best choice for you based on the information and programming it had. It gave you the illusion that you made that choice, but it made it for you.
Well, certainly having the right information or wrong information guides your choice, no question about that. But I would argue it's still a choice that someone is making. So
I can see how it would not be a choice.
Okay, you say you have a very good life, but what about someone who doesn't?
Right.
I mean, and you hear these stories all the time, and people get depressed and say, "Gee, I have a miserable life, and nothing I want to do is coming."
Okay, so
true,
the solution to that,
and therefore I don't have. The world is against me, and that's destiny, and I'm going to be a loser for the rest of my life. Screw it.
Well, we don't have to be that hopeless. First of all, we're born with problem-solving abilities, some of us better than others, but evolution programs us to solve problems. So maybe if we're not in a happy situation, our brains, the programming will figure out a better way of life. Maybe something will come into our environment that we didn't expect, and it will affect our programming and how we react to it. Also, we're fortunate that we're a social species, and there's a benefit to us helping each other out, to cooperation. And evolution can reward cooperation. So even if you can't figure a way out of your doldrums or your situation yourself, that your programming is not that good, or you're truly in such a bad state that no amount of programming could do it, there's always the hope that one of your fellow human beings will come along, because we're programmed to feel empathy for each other. We have mirror neurons in our brain that we're born with.
Right.
And we feel empathy and compassion, and by helping out fellow members of our tribe, it increases our survival likelihood.
Well, I mean, obviously, you're putting a very positive spin on the effect of evolution, and I commend you for that. On the other hand, it's just as easily to put a negative spin, and it could very well be that evolution has brought the human race to the point, a lot of people would say this, where we're capable and we probably will destroy ourselves. In which case, it's not such a positive spin that evolution is such a wonderful force that in the end ends up positively. I mean, look what happened. Well, I mean, the dinosaurs, of course, you had a meteor come out and kill them, but the point is, it's not obvious at all that evolution is good or bad or is going to result in a positive outcome. Evolution is simply evolution, and simply it's going to all evolution is to promote the species that does a better job of reproducing itself. And that's pretty much where we got where we are.
The fact that we're a social species
helped a lot, absolutely.
I mean, mutually assured destruction, what we used to have in the Cold War with Russia, actually worked. Both of us knew we could wipe each other off the planet, and neither of us did it because of our survival instinct.
Yeah, but now we have some crazy guy in North Korea, so who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, so he could do some harm. I don't think he could. We would let him get to the point of being able to wipe out, the whole Earth. And this
I see where you're coming, and I think I'm just looking at the time now, and I think we can. We can agree that there's different outcomes depending on what attitude you want to take, and I think that's the point where we're coming to right now.
Well,
I think we should go on. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I want to get into the more positive aspects of evolution. That evolution rewards cooperation, and I think it is inevitable that equality for women, gays, blacks is inevitable because you're not stamping down talent. And we're even seeing this in if you go for the competition model. The businesses in Minnesota are stepping up to the plate and saying Minnesota should allow same-sex marriage because other states are doing it. And if I got a qualified gay person in New York, and this came up in testimony at the state capitol, how can we recruit a qualified gay or lesbian professor from New York to come to the University of Minnesota and teach when they will lose benefits because they have same-sex marriage there and they don't have it here? So the pressure is for equality, freeing up the talent of more and more people.
I agree with you 100%.
And it's evolutionary
and
pressure.
I don't think it has anything to do with whether free will is an illusion or not. You would have the same forces in play if we had free will and we're making decisions.
But what I'm saying is you don't have to despair that if there's no free will,
I understand.
If there's no free will and evolution totally rules, there's still cause for hope.
Well, okay, so
because of this cooperation factor.
So hopefully, there's a lot of hope here. Is that most people once they realize, or, as you would say, that there is no free will, if there's no free will, that they would take that attitude. And I think there's the difference between. There's an issue of people having a positive attitude versus a negative attitude. Let's quickly, we only have a couple of minutes here. Let's quickly go on to something I know you wanted to discuss, which is if free will doesn't exist, what does it say of our system of justice?
Yeah, it says that revenge is a good motivator for us to catch people that have caused harm to society, but then after that, we should forget about it. That we should work on, if they really couldn't help but do these evil things, we have a right to protect ourselves, to catch them, and to keep them from doing other harms. But revenge makes no sense, but rehabilitation does make sense, to try to transform this person into a useful member of society. And if we can't, then we have to keep them locked up.
Sure. And I would argue that exactly the same rules apply if we have free will. You still have. I'm certainly in favor of a system of a similar system of justice as you are, whether free will exists or doesn't exist.
Yeah, but a lot of people think that saying there's no free will means that we can't prosecute anybody, and we still can justifiably do it as in evolutionary terms to protect ourselves.
Okay.
But revenge makes no sense, but rehabilitation does.
All right. Well, I think in the end, we wound up agreeing to disagree on whether there's free will or not. I think we agree on the humanistic principles that come out of it. So let's just end on that.
Yes.
Welcome. Thank you very much for coming, August. It was an interesting conversation.
Well, thank you, Nathan.
And I would like to thank you for joining us and listening to this debate. For more information about Humanists of Minnesota, you can go to our website, humanistofmn.org. And my name is Nathan Curland. Good evening. So, thank you.